you two handouts that I have today that I've given you. One is the Inquest and Coroner Records, and what can you find and how can you use them? And those are notes. And then I'll stop the share on that one and go back to the share on what about reports by officials. This is just a singleton for you that I'll refer to a little later on, where I found managed to capture actually a summary from the Deputy Montana State Mine Inspector's report in 1900. Yes, we had some of those. It's not perfect. The reason I do these is I'm trying to show you a variety of things with at least 4 different strategies today on how to find these papers when they're not out online. There's always a few out online, but not nearly enough. In Montana right now, for example, the only county that I know of that shares their coroner records out online is Flathead County. And they are shared for free at Family Search. And I noticed that when I went out and looked at one specific person that happened to be in the index, and looked that person up at Ancestry, it popped up there too. But Ancestry has just recently gotten those records. So I'm going to stop the share on this. I'm going to go back to share and go to my presentation. And hopefully, what do I want to do here? I want to get into and see if I can't move this screen around so that I can do the slideshow. There we go. So give me a thumbs up if you can see this screen, Coroner Records Value Added. Okay, that's fine. Then I'm going to do that and pull that down there for now. Okay, so today is Coroner Records because they can be so valuable for you. They're kind of an interim step. People will come to me and say, well, I think that there was an inquest about my mom, or there was an inquest about my uncle or whatever, and we will in fact look it up. And what there really was is perhaps there was an investigation of a particular death. So we're going to talk today about investigations versus coroner jury with verdicts, and then also things that are in between that are specified by law. I don't know if you realize it or not, but say that in Montana, you expired, shall we say, at the local emergency room, and you weren't there very long. There will be an informal, at least, investigation of your death by the sheriff's office. It will still be signed off most practically by the emergency room doctor or whoever saw you, but there are many rules, and we're very fortunate that in Montana, we follow some pretty well established formal uniform rules from across the United States. These laws today will give you some ideas about what other states should be doing in uniform code, but be aware that other states don't always and did not always do these things. So I'm going to the second slide. Did your ancestor's death result in an inquiry? And you have a handout on this. And so the coroner does have to inquire into and determine the cause and manner of death and all circumstances surrounding a human death in certain situations where there was an injury, either recent or remote in origin, even if it could have been years ago. Say, for instance, that we're looking at our guy who was Superman and suffered a terrible accident. At his death, at least the reason for his paralysis would have been mentioned on that record, even though that injury had happened quite some time before his death. If a deceased or any other person died as a result of an act or omission, like a criminal or suspected criminal act, a medically suspicious death, something that was unusual, like somebody falling where they wouldn't usually fall, a death of unknown circumstances, including fetal deaths, accidental deaths get reported no matter what. And that's so that not only is the death investigated, of course, but we begin to keep statistics on that as a means to be able to take care of some of those public health problems, we hope. By an agent, a disease, or a medical condition that poses a threat to public health. It's going to be interesting in the future to be able to see death certificates, for example, where it was an active COVID problem and others in a home got the same COVID germs but did not expire. Or whenever a death occurred while they were incarcerated in a prison, a jail, or confined to a detention facility that is owned and operated by the state or a political subdivision. And guess what? It still goes down to, even if the deceased was incarcerated in a prison that is held by a corporation, there are still tentacles from the state tying that death back to an investigation. Or while the deceased was in custody or being taken into custody of a law enforcement agency during their employment, you'll see a few of those today, or less than 24 hours after a deceased was admitted to a medical facility, or if in fact when they got to the emergency room they were DOA, dead on arrival, or in any manner that where that death was unattended, unwitnessed, and the deceased had not been attended by a physician at any time in a 30-day period of time prior to the death. And this one I didn't know about. If the dead human body is to be cremated, shipped into our state, and lacks proper medical certification or burial or transfer permits, wow, or anything that occurs under suspicious circumstances. So that's our Montana Code annotated. Yes, there's more than Chapter 46, 72, and a few others are involved also. In fact, if you go out to the current law books and you get everything that refers to a coroner's record or a coroner's investigation of any type, including autopsies, you're going to find that you end up with about 24 pages of 8-point type information. But it's pretty clear, really, and it's worth it to you. I'm here today with this because a coroner's inquiry of any kind leads you to records. Remember, anytime that someone makes a law, there's going to be records that are attached, and county coroners are required to record their investigations and follow the law very closely. So it isn't just getting to be the county commissioner or being appointed by the sheriff's office to be that coroner appointee, but you're going to have to also get some training. You're going to have to know what's going on. I know in our Cascade County right now, our sheriff is attempting to not only have several sheriff's deputies trained, but also a full-time person. I will keep you posted. I don't know if that full-time person has been hired yet just to do those coroner inquiries. Why would we need that? Well, we're a town of Great Falls, and every day there's someone, or even sometimes several someones, who die at home, or they die in an accident or other things, and it takes up a lot of investigator time. I'm going to give you some strategies today. Number one of the first things you want to get, just to be sure of whether or not the coroner investigated a particular person in your family, you want to get that death certificate. And if you can, you want to get the funeral home records, because the funeral home records also pay attention to laws, and those laws tell them what kind of checkoff records and summary statements and so on that they must make as they pick up a body from the hospital. That's covered and it's legal for you to see, or anything else in terms of those funeral home records. You're also going to be able to see right on that statement as they pick up that person from the hospital or a home, whether or not there was a disease that they need to be concerned about. My other great thing for you, it's paid huge dividends for me, is finding county commission minutes, because these record the payments to witnesses, jurors, and the coroner every time the county commission meets. Yes, they still do this. No, not everything will be out online today, but I can tell you up through the 1960s and 1970s, in most newspapers in the United States, you will find those county commission minutes, or at least a summary of those, and they will be witness by witness, juror by juror, by coroner. The coroner, another neat coroner record to look at that point is the coroner's report on various personal pieces of property that were turned over regarding any death that was investigated. So there you go. You get an informal way to see who actually was investigated by the coroner. Today, in today's world, you will need to ask at the coroner, but it is something that you can get. Of course, today we've really been turned on to news articles, since we have newspapers.com and newspaper archives and genealogy bank and things like the Wyoming state that has its own site, Texas has its own site, California, Montana has a site for a lot of small newspapers. You're going to want to get all of the articles you can and get them from different newspapers in the area, because they may be slightly different. Finally, you're still going to want to write for that coroner jury record or that coroner investigatory record, and be aware of those officialese terms that are used. Those are the things that can change and do change based on what a state has used before. So even if they're using some uniform code information, they may still allow those other terms to creep in. In Montana, you're going to see that if it really involved very little, then it's an investigation, primarily done by the coroner, and if needed, accompanied by an autopsy or whatever. One step up may be a coroner jury record, where a coroner's jury was actually called to look at the information on a suspicious death. And of course, then we can also begin to look at all of the different types of records that are available after that. So those are strategies. Get the death certificate, get the funeral home record, find the county commission minutes, even if you have to go to the county commission to get them. They are open to everyone. Get news articles, and write for the coroner jury record if it is not out online. This is my grandpa, and I was thrilled in some ways years ago to find out that Flathead County, Montana, had put out their coroner's register records. My grandpa's death was investigated because he was driving his old vehicle, as he was 83 years old, driving his vehicle from Big Fork, Montana, over to Havre, and somewhere over along that Highway 2, actually very, very close to the little community of Essex, he had a massive coronary occlusion and gently dived into a snowbank. And so I was thrilled to see this record, because I could see roughly where the accident had been. It said 3.5 miles west of the Continental Divide near Essex. And I could see that my uncle John Lee, or Jack, who lived at Seeley Lake, was actually the contact that was found in my grandpa's billfold. And that my grandpa's personal effects found on his body were noted. He had a Timex wristwatch, and he had $534.65 in his pocket, in his billfold and clothing. The juror's verdict, if you can notice, even though Flathead County and other counties commonly use this paperwork, I can tell you our county uses it, this very same one. You will see down under the juror's verdict, you're going to be able to tell that it was not inquested and there wasn't a juror's verdict. It was just an investigation held right at Essex, right at the place. And they determined no, there was no act of violence with this. Then I saw in the bottom of that form where my Uncle Jack had recovered Granddad's personal effects from Saul Catron, county coroner, and that was pretty well it. I was really happy when I saw this piece of paperwork, but I had others in my family say, we know he died up there, but where did he die? It was almost its morbid curiosity towards what was the actual milepost. And so I mapped it. And you can do this with any map. What I actually did is I generously mapped within the circle that you see the area, the general area around Essex. And it would have been, you know, kind of going upward from Essex where they found his body. So wherever you can, if you can, map those things. You can map accidents. You can map industrial accidents. There will usually be some kind of map or some kind of report that is quite technical that will allow you to see that information. And it all adds to what really happened to this person. So my grandpa then, and this is the first thing, he had a coroner record, but it was an investigation. I got his death certificate. I have not been able to get the records from the funeral home, so I don't have those, but I got his death certificate and I've got this record. It's a one-pager that says it all. It was an investigation signed personally that day by Saul Catron. His body was released to the funeral home. No coroner's jury was called. And so the first strategy with that is determining the depth of the investigation made. Sometimes there's a very small investigation made. We would call it a small investigation if we saw that a person had died at home, just like my neighbor across the street did last Wednesday. But his wife would tell you it wasn't a small investigation at all because she had cops and the sheriff's office there at her house for most of the day as they determined the cause of Jay's death and determined that it was probably natural. It's going to look like a one-liner on the death certificate then. It's going to say, no, this death was natural. Was the coroner there? Well, yes, in Montana, a coroner's representative at least would need to be there to investigate the death because it happened at home. Remember, someplace where it was not witnessed. His wife says that he had gone to sleep, and so he was by himself when he died. So examine that report. Is it an investigation? If so, how heavy is the investigation? Did it go on for several days? Well, they attempted to make a ruling. If there is, there's going to be extra reports. In Montana, some of the best coroner records that I have seen are in Lewis and Clark County. They have saved everything, including FBI files, all kinds of things. So it just depends on what is there. You will find that generally the sheriff's office is very open to releasing those reports once they are concluded. Remember, they are a public document. And then, of course, when you're writing your summary, don't just get the pieces of paper and say, that's something neat. Remember to report the depth of your investigation. For my grandpa, I could say it was an investigation and his body was released quite quickly. And the funeral was held within a week or so. However, early on, in Montana, murders may have remained a mystery, unsolved, and you're going to find these the further back you go. When I go into Montana, Oregon, Washington, Idaho records, where I've looked for materials on people who died before 1920 or so. Yes, there are rules regarding a death certificate, and yes, there will be things on that death certificate. I also, in that period of time before about 1925, I looked for all the things that should have been answered on the death certificate and weren't. You're going to find quite a few many times. I've been investigating a small community up near Big Fork, Montana called Ferndale. And I found an interesting murder in September of 1904 down in my little community at Ferndale, right on the Swan River. His body was found at George Huddleston's place. He'd been fishing there when he was apparently ambushed by someone and killed by a single shot. His gun, his rifle, was about 40 feet away, and it looked to the people there like he had gone for his gun, gone to try to find that rifle, get to it, but he was ambushed before he could get to it. Huddleston was not in the area, but Bob always had permission to fish there. He was killed by a single shot. His dog was there, and later on, his dog wouldn't let anyone near. He was very, very faithful. But Coroner Willoughby from Kalispell and Dr. Morrow of Big Fork and an attorney, G.H. Grubb of Big Fork, investigated and talked to the two men who had found the body. This murder was never solved. And it's ironic because, doggone it, I know the actual place. I've been able to map it because I knew what George M. Huddleston's 159 acres looked like. And I had the map from the federal people regarding this. And so the three large sections there in darker orange are where he lived. And that arrow points right to the tip, right on the river where the good fishing spot was. How did I know that good fishing spot? Because it had been in two other articles that George Huddleston had a very good place to fish right there on the Swan River. So maps can help people too, and they can help explain your story. Here's an example of an accidental drowning. Marion Bradshaw's body was recovered. It was recovered from the South Fork River of the Flathead, and he was buried later on at the Whitefish Cemetery. And his description of his effects are there, and what he had, $6.85 in money. But this is an accidental death. I want you to note and remember, this investigation by W.J. Miller of the coroner's office did not advance to the level where a juror's panel was needed. Notice again, inquest is lined out and it just says there's an investigation. And remember that a coroner's jury may determine whether or not there should be an inquest. An inquest is another further activity that we'll talk about a little later on this spring. Examine that verdict also to see who made the final determination, because this is the man who made it, W.J. Miller. You're going to want to put that in your report. In fact, some of these are so brief that you can put these in quotation marks and type them in or write them into your story for this person. It will give other information to people that's important. You can still see here also that Sherman and Miller were the funeral directors from Whitefish who made sure that all of the various things from that body or near that body were returned and who they were returned to. And over at the right, in the coroner's fees, you can see that the coroner's person claimed 96 miles in mileage and 1 day per diem. You're going to find great information on some of these forms. Here's another person, Sam Hoi Sun, a Chinese person born in China. He was a cook at Kalispell. His certificate, I want you to notice, there's lots of things missing here. No attempt with parents, name of father, birthplace, or whatever, not filled in, even though it's probably China. No attempts over on the right side in the medical certificate of death to answer very much. It just says he was found dead, no sign of violence, had been sick for some time, and that was it. And that diagnosis again was made by Miller. If we look a little further, the only description they made of Sam Hoy's son, again, here's some clues for you about how much attention was paid, was his age, not his height, not the color of anything, his hair, his beard, his mustache. Although in the time you can find information on other people that do talk about the distinguishing marks and the description of clothes. I finally got another piece of information that was not on the death certificate. Here we go. He died in Chinatown on 3rd Avenue West in Kalispell, Montana. Chinatown, I lived in that area and I didn't even know they had a Chinatown. I'm still looking for a local map that terms what that is. Or was that an informal reference to a few buildings? I don't know. He was found on the floor in his bedroom. He was buried out at Demersville Cemetery. And that's pretty much it. I'm still looking for that map of Kalispell's Chinatown. So it reveals an additional fact. He'd been sick for some time, remember? That was on the death certificate. But here, on this investigation by Miller, he adds a little more. He says that he had been sick for some time without medical attendance. Well, that without medical attendance tells us a great deal more, and it tells us why probably the coroner went no further with this particular coroner record. So I found his brief obituary just a day later. Says in the Chinese section of town, still don't know where that is exactly. According to his friends, he'd been sick for some time and death was no doubt due to natural causes. And it just says the interment will be held tomorrow at Demersville, where funeral services will be held according to Chinese custom. Wow. I'd like to know what that is, but the information is sparse and I could find no more. So sometimes you find a lot, and sometimes you end up with lots of questions. This is sad. Arlene Leola Liebert, age 6, died in a section house fire. Her dad and mom and their children were living in a railroad section house up near Essex. And in the middle of the night, that building burned down. The dad got everybody out. He thought he had awakened Arlene and told her to follow the others. And it was very sad because when they discovered she was not outside, he attempted to go in, but the fire was too brutal and he could not. There was no autopsy held. It says she was cremated in the burning of the section house and she was buried, whatever they had left or whatever they were going to do, at Conrad Cemetery. And this was just an investigation again by Miller. It says the cause of death was accidental cremation caused by burning of the section house. Poor little kiddo. And he terms himself to be the coroner. Well, I went out to look for more information on this one, and I went out to newspapers.com, and I knew I would have to probably do some browsing to be able to find some things about this family. And so I thought I would show you just what it takes in newspapers.com if you're going to use the browse button to get into first the United States, Montana, Kalispell, the Daily Interlake, with all of the other papers listed there. What I did is I went down and I said, who has 1923 and has the biggest amount of things? And then who had the October papers? And that's one thing you can do. Remember, you can do a similar thing also at Genealogy Bank and at Newspaper Archives. And here's the article the next day, just the first part of it. They find no trace of this Java, that's a little area near Essex, fire victim. And it just says, no trace was found of her body. After looking through the section house ruins, it was determined that all of her was consumed by the fire. Her parents and several of her siblings got out, and her dad attempted to get her out, but the flames were too much. I went out then and said, what else can I find? I'm intrigued. Can I find out anything more about this Liebert family? And I did find them out at Find a Grave. So now you can add another place, Find a Grave, other things like it, other free sites where you could go to look to see if somebody has recorded, say, a grave marker in a cemetery, or has gone through records like the coroner records or the death certificates to at least put a person in. Now, I can tell you, having looked at this and having read the thing at Find a Grave, that she does not have an individual gravestone, although she was the first one buried in her family's plot. But this family stayed around, and so I could find information on all of these others, and they are all buried there. So I could garner things, and I will tell you, one of the neatest things about family searches, frequently you can pick up the obituary there or other facts that a savvy genealogist has put in about that family. Here's another accidental death that only required an investigation. This was a 14-year-old who was shot. He was wounded by a .22 caliber rifle inflicted by a friend, Harry Joy. And the bullet went forward of the right ear at Summers, Montana, in the location named. And this 14-year-old's death at that point in 1923 was termed to be accidental with no more action. Today, there undoubtedly would be more, just because of our laws. Here's another one from this area. This man, William Bianchi, an Italian immigrant, was working at Summers Lumber when a tie fell on his back as he was unloading a railroad car. Today, we would be investigating an industrial accident. At this point, it was still termed accidental, although since at least 1904, there had been investigations of industrial accidents in Montana. I could not find whether or not Summers Lumber Co. was ever sued by the family. But there was his death report again. And even though there are things here, I want you to look and see that there are things over on the left side where he's described just as a laborer. They did not describe the general nature of the industry, although they could have. They didn't know more about his birthplace or the mom or the dad, although I will tell you that his brother, Alto, gave the information, and his wife was also available. I don't know if they went back to query them later or they just made one attempt at it. But this again is an example of things that probably would not be allowed today unless we truly did not know what was happening. What's interesting here is that it says the diagnosis was confirmed by a radiographer. Wow, an X-ray. And here he is. I found him in the Conrad Cemetery. I could follow his family further, I thought, but he's the only one of the Bianchi family buried here. There's one other one out in Summers, but it's from another Bianchi family. So this gives me a clue again that that family moved on. There are lots of clues when you begin to put all of these things together. Going back to county commissioner records, county commissioners hold their meetings usually once a month. Sometimes they have special meetings, but for every single meeting they hold, they must announce that meeting prior to it so people have a means to know where that meeting is being held and when, and they also must report it out afterwards in minutes. Frequently today in Montana, those minutes are available within a day or so, or even sooner, right out online. I think our counties in some ways right now are doing very, very good things with their minutes. It's again, just comparing the minutes with the actual order of the meeting to see if everything got reported. Coroners may not do anything else. They may not directly report whose deaths have been investigated, but at least a couple of times a year or more, they will report how they disposed of the effects of certain people who had been investigated. So here we are here. Here's Coroner A.J. Miller saying all of these people died. It doesn't say the day when they died, but this is available in October 23 of 1924. And he's saying, here's what was here. And William Bianchi says had nothing other than, his clothing, whatever that was on him. Arlene, it's not Fiebert, it's Liebert. You will find misspellings, so watch for them. Here's Philip Murray, an accidental fracture of neck caused by falling over a cliff while he was on road construction work. Again, here we are, the coroner saying this was accidental fracture of neck. So you have to look for those words and for that cause of death, because if it had not been accidental, if, for instance, a machine had swung against him or whatever and he went over, you would not see that word accidental. You would see more investigation. And here he is again, a little more filled in, but not a lot. And no autopsy on the body, even though you can see fractured spine in cervical region caused by falling over a 30-foot embankment. And that was it for it. The informant was the Kalispell General Hospital at that point. So it's interesting to see that they made the choice of saying that the informant for this would be the hospital and not Miller. This is a medically suspicious death, remember, or an unusual death or a death of unknown circumstances. This child died on March 31, 1924. This was a 7-month-old child with smallpox who had not been attended by a physician. Remember those rules that had been there. And he just makes the note that the parents were Christian Scientists. Today, it would be investigated further. At that point, again, you have to make the judgment call and say, okay, how much more investigation would they have done, or was it something that was accepted on its face? But it's just an investigation. It did not go to a coroner's jury. Here's a suicide that did go to a juror's verdict. It went beyond. And I want you to remember, if your relative is called to be a jury member or is a witness for a coroner's investigation, you want to get those too. It's not just if something happened where your person was investigated by the coroner, but if they are a jury member or they're a witness, you're going to want to record the event in their timeline, noting the fee that they got for being a witness or being on the jury, and then following it further to see what happened. This was a fellow by the name of Carl Richardson. They returned the following verdict, that he came to his death on March 25, 1924 at Kalispell, suicide by gunshot wound, with his brother even bringing the gun in. So the coroner did not retain that during the investigation. That would be different today. But you'll see over at the left, you'll see all kinds of names of witnesses. Frank, his brother. Ethel, his wife. I had to infer that from other information. A.J. Burns, George Roper, Mr. and Mrs. J.G. Thomson, who were neighbors, I found out. And then Sadie Mae King, who was Mrs. Richardson's friend and who claimed to know nothing about it later on. But they each got paid $1.50 during the time that they were witnesses. The names of the jurors are included here. There's actually 8, but only 6 were required to sign the document. And then you'll see the coroner fees again and all of the different things that were there. So there's a lot of information about this particular suicide. The witnesses, they listened to testimony of the witnesses. They made an official declaration of type. And you want to record these. You want to record the newspaper stories if they have, because these people may have experienced trauma. They may have told their personal story about such an event. They may have talked to family members, or they may have talked to the witnesses, your particular people, and the witness may remember things. And look for those newspaper articles. Interestingly, the brother's investigation was what was accepted by the coroner. The brother testified, Frank, said that he had investigated the circumstances with his two brothers, that they had satisfied themselves that the death was due to suicide. He explained the position of the gun, which was away from the body, and said that he and his brothers had made tests with the arm in question. Wow. And found that the character of the wound and the position of the gun were logical. In explaining the removal of the magazine, which was on the bed beside the gun, Frank Richardson believed that this was done by his brother as a precaution against the possible injury to others, explaining that that gun was light on the trigger and after firing would lack only a touch on the trigger to fire it again. Wow, so that tells us a whole bunch more than what was actually in the coroner's summary. This is one reason why you're going to want to get those articles. This is another example of an actual coroner's register report with a verdict by a jury. Again, they don't always take a lot. This man came to his death by being run over by a truck, and they said right away the deceased, Edward, came to his death from a crushed skull resulting from being run over by a truck while in the employ of the Empire Lumber Company at Kyla, Montana. They found that he died, the deceased was accidental, and that no blame was supposed to be attached to anyone. Boy, that's a different kind of thing again. I've had trouble finding that article. There's just a brief article that I found. I think I'm going to have to go in a wider sweep to the state to find out if someone else, as a newspaper reporter, investigated. There wasn't too much on this. There were 6 people again who were called as citizens to be on this jury, and all 6 signed. There were witnesses there, and one wonders how and why the conclusion was reached that there wouldn't be any blame attached to anyone. Well, you're going to see things like this in records. You'll see summaries of reports from state and national people. This is from the Montana Record Herald on Monday, December 3 of 1900. They were, as you know, they were investigating fatal accidents in Butte mines. This was not unusual. There had been 25 killed in 1899 and the first month or two of 1900. And this was a stat report of the Deputy State Mine Inspector, Frank Hunter. And you've got a sheet, a handout, which shows some of those. And I'm going to particularly read you the example for Pat Murphy, whose death, again, no one was to blame. So here we are. Pat Murphy, a carman employed at the diamond mine in Butte, was instantly killed by being blasted on August 4, 1900 on the 3rd floor of the 900-foot level at 11:45 a.m. The coroner's jury found that no one was to blame. Wow. Here's another one. Here's Bernard McDonald, a carpenter employed at the Smokehouse mine, instantly killed on October 1, 1900 at 2 p.m. by falling out of the bucket. He fell about 200 feet. The coroner's jury found that McDonald was drunk, and that caused him to fall off the bucket. So as you read these, I want you to be aware of the fact that beginning about 1898, these reports for the state are available. We do have a couple of books for a couple of years right in our library here at our Great Falls Genealogy Library, and they do have the summaries of not only the mines from Butte, but also mines from across the state, and most importantly, other industrial accidents. So there are other people frequently investigating these. I say this because one of the things you need to look at carefully is if there is an industrial accident and you find that the local coroner did not submit a record that you can find, like an investigation or a coroner's jury or whatever, you will frequently find on the death certificate for that person that an industrial accident investigation has ensued, and you are going to have to look other places to find that information. Remember again that county commission reports are going to tell you who got paid for what. I'll show you some from Gallatin County. We don't have the coroner records out online. They've got to be in Gallatin County because, again, remember, those coroner records are kept for all time, or they're supposed to be. You will find that there are omissions and sometimes books didn't get filed and so on. But you will find that if nothing else, even if you can't find the actual coroner record, like you've just been looking at ones from the Flathead Valley, they are responsible to report any expenditures through the year. And so you're going to see things like this. Gallatin County Coroner Record hints from September 1905 will tell you the Bozeman Courier there says, hey, there's a whole bunch of people over on the left who were paid $6 or $1.50 or whatever for coroner jury fees. And so it looks like there might have been people who were held over for a second day or a third day or whatever for a jury. There might be several different coroner's jury fees there. But the important thing is that you could look at, let's say, from June through September and find those actual deaths and find paperwork, coroner records at the sheriff's office for a particular thing. Now, notice it doesn't tell you who died or what was being investigated. It just tells you who the juries were, the coroner's juries were, and over on the right, it tells you other people again who were coroner's witnesses that were called. Is this all that was in this list? No, the list was really, really long for this particular commission report, but you're going to be amazed by what are in the county commission reports. Just remember, the coroner gets paid, and all county officials get paid through the county commission. Thus, their actions are described in reports, individual reports of deaths. Their actions may be shown in, say, regional prison report that they have, like we have in Cascade County. There's a regional prison report every once in a while by our county sheriff. So you need to look into these coroner records, even though you won't necessarily see them in the newspapers today, because it's much more efficient for them to just put them out online or make them available immediately. You have immediate recourse to find these things. They are public information. And I want you to consider the times of any coroner report. The ones from today, where we're used to getting actionable reports nearly immediately, or at least as a particular investigation progresses. You're going to have newspapers, of course, that you can look at, but you need to consider the time, because even if a law existed at a certain time, how did the investigators, coroners, and jurors respond in their conclusions? How far did they take that investigation, where there were perhaps people who did not take their children to a doctor? Because in the time, you have to recognize the times were just really, really different. In your summary of any coroner report for your ancestor, you're going to want to add your opinion, but label it and say it's your opinion. So, for example, here's a brief one. It was 1931. While Charles, my great uncle, died at age 19 as the result of his friend's careless handling of a rifle, his friend was not charged. Well, my opinion is I could at least say today in 2025 that would not be the case, and then I would quote the law. So you need to consider the times. and what did happen and what didn't happen. You also, at that point in that report, need to report what the family story was. Even if you find that the family story was off from what the actual report was, you need to put that down. One of the saddest things that we see frequently in our library here in Great Falls are people coming in who may not trust to go look to the sheriff's office to get a report, but who want to know how to get the report and if someone else will go get the report for them because their family story of what actually happened is very different. I'm sure that happened in the past also. Remember the strategies. Find the county commission minutes. Look at several months worth as needed. Look backward and forward because sometimes they get addended later. There may be an addend, or even look at the things where they're wrapping things up for a year and look at the very end to see if they have added reports. Get the death certificate, get the funeral home records where possible. Get all the news articles. Recognize that unless you have actual proceedings that are noted, you may not have all the info from those news articles. And then write for that investigation or that coroner jury record. What I do is I always say I would like any and all records associated with this death, and then I named them in parentheses. Perhaps a coroner jury record, perhaps a coroner investigation. And I use the word perhaps, except with the death certificate. You want the death certificate so that they know that you're not just asking for one thing, but you are asking for several items so that they must answer back, hopefully, and tell you what they have, what they don't have, and where to go get what they're not able to give you. Remember, that's your strategy. That's what you want to get next. And remember to always investigate the depth of the investigation because you will have questions. Write your questions down. What questions weren't answered for you? You may not get an official answer for those, but at the time that you're investigating this, you will be showing what came to mind with you after you had personally investigated this particular happening. Sometimes autopsies are required. There can be requirements for autopsies. The coroner is the one who shall order one performed, and they can retain a medical examiner to perform it if they want. It's not within the discretion of the coroner to deny that autopsy, especially if a county attorney says, no, I want that. Or an attorney general for the state says, no, we need to do an autopsy on that body. So don't think that the word ends with a particular coroner. Remember, early on in Montana, many coroners were medical doctors who traded that job around kind of from year to year amongst one another. So they all got at least some guaranteed income. Today, they do not have to be medical officer, although some training is highly advised. So look at it carefully, but it is within the discretion of the coroner saying, yes, we'll do that. You'll also see that sometimes, even though the coroner asked to have an autopsy performed, the family refused. So look at that death certificate carefully. Sometimes long investigations and inquests are required, so you need to read the law. It's worth getting the law for the state. Believe me, after you've done a few, you're going to discover that they're under a uniform code, and so usually I look through the law for a place like Colorado and say, okay, what else appears to be different from the uniform code I've got beside me? And there's always a few things, mainly terminology though. Look for clues in the available documents and newspapers. Use your skills and use those strategies. You know what to go after, how to go after it, and how to be thorough. So without further ado, happy hunting.